Caller, panicked. Help! Somebody, please help me. 911, dispatcher. 911, what's your emergency? Caller, there's an alligator attacking my neighbor, Julia Banks. She's trapped in her pool. Please, you have to hurry. Dispatcher, stay on the ED line. Help is on the way. Is she conscious? Is she breathing? Caller, I don't know. She was screaming, and then she went under. I see blood in the water. Please, send someone fast. Narrator, voiceover begins, Clearwater Springs, Florida. A quiet town known more for its citrus groves than for horror stories. But on one summer afternoon, terror struck in the most unlikely place, a backyard pool. Julia Banks, 28, was a beloved figure in the community. Kind, passionate, and fiercely devoted to wildlife, she had spent years rescuing orphaned raccoons, injured birds, and abandoned possums. But none captured her heart, quite like Reef. 5 years earlier, near the edge of the Appalachian River, Julia found a hatchling, an alligator no bigger than her hand. While most would have run away, Julia picked it up, wrapped it in a towel, and brought it home. She named him Reef. From that day on, Reef and Julia were inseparable. Friends say their bond was instant, like he'd imprinted on her. She even joked he thought she was his mother. With a special wildlife permit from her animal rehab center, Julia was allowed to raise Reef legally, and raise him she did. By the age of 3, Reef measured over 5 feet long. By 5 years, he was nearly 8 feet, a full-grown apex predator. Neighbors noticed. Wildlife officers did too. They warned her, no matter how tame Reef seemed, instincts would always win out. To a wild animal, trust means nothing compared to food, territory, and survival. But Julia didn't listen. To her, Reef wasn't a threat. He was family. She fed him by hand, swam with him in her backyard pool, even let him sunbathe next to her as she read on the patio. Photos flooded her social media, Reef resting his head in her lap, following, her voice like a loyal dog. Some viewers were enchanted. Others were horrified. She treated Reef like her child, one colleague said later. Maybe that was the problem. For 5 years, everything seemed fine. Until that tragic August afternoon, when the illusion shattered. She found him in the summer of 2018, half submerged in a muddy bank along the Appalachian River, chirping faintly for a mother that would never return. He was no more than 6 inches long, alone and vulnerable, unlikely to survive on his own. That tiny alligator became Julia's next rescue. But unlike the dozens of animals she had cared for, rehabilitated, and released, she made a different choice with him. Under her wildlife rehabilitation license, Julia applied for and was granted a special permit to raise the hatchling indefinitely. She named him Reef. At first, Reef lived indoors, in a custom enclosure outfitted with heating lamps and a small artificial pond. Julia hand-fed him a diet of ground turkey mixed with vitamins, tapping a spoon gently against the glass to signal mealtime. To her, it was like raising a child. Every feeding, every interaction reinforced the belief that Reef wasn't like other alligators, that he was different, that he knew her. As Reef grew, so did the risks. But Julia didn't see it that way. When he reached 3 feet in length, she moved him to an outdoor enclosure with a kiddie pool. By the time he was 4 feet long, that pool was replaced with a fully converted in-ground swimming pool, her own backyard sanctuary. Julia swam with him regularly. She said it built trust. Reef's calm behavior, his stillness when she spoke, his response to her voice, all of it, in Julia's eyes, was proof of a true bond. But to trained wildlife officers, those behaviors were something else entirely, signs of habitual conditioning. Still, Reef never showed aggression. Julia could float beside him, stroke his jaw, and he would close his eyes, motionless, as if soothed by her presence. He recognized her scent. He followed her voice. In 5 years, not once did he snap, hiss, or lash out. It was easy, too easy, for Julia to believe Reef saw her as family. For 5 years, he lived alongside her, seeming tame, even affectionate. But nature doesn't forget. By 2023, Reef weighed nearly 300 pounds. His massive tail alone could knock an adult to the ground. He had long outgrown his original enclosure, and his diet had evolved to match his size: whole chickens, frozen rats, fish, tossed in from a distance, never by hand. And yet Julia still entered the water with him, still floated silently at his side, still whispered to him, smiling, as if nothing had changed. But it had. She just didn't know it yet. By the summer of 2022, Reef had reached 7.5 feet in length. His body was solid muscle. His snout was thick. His eyes, once soft and blinking with dependency, now cold, alert, watchful. And still, Julia treated him like the helpless hatchling she had rescued from the swamp. Julia still swam with him, still talked to him like a friend. She now fed him whole chickens, which Reef snapped up with thunderous force. People around her began to worry. Wildlife officers, neighbors, even close friends. Kenneth Lyles, a seasoned field officer with the Florida Wildlife Commission, was one of them. After a routine inspection raised some flags, he visited Julia's property. He'd already heard of Reef through the grapevine. He was one of those names that circulated quietly during staff meetings. The pet gator lady. In his official report, Lyles documented Reef's size, the conditions of the enclosure, and the animal's behavioral quirks. But what stood out most wasn't the alligator. It was Julia. At one point, he told her plainly, "Instincts kick in, Julia. He's not a dog." She smiled like she'd heard it all before. To Julia, warnings were rooted in fear, not truth. She insisted that no one knew Reef like she did. He was calm, predictable, safe. But neighbors began to report troubling incidents. Loud hissing during feeding time. One man claimed he saw Reef rear up, slamming his tail against the fence as Julia approached with a feeding bucket. A teenage girl walking her dog said she saw Reef lunge at the chain-link enclosure, jaws wide. Still, Julia dismissed the growing signs of danger. She posted a video online, Reef resting peacefully by the pool while she sat cross-legged just feet away. In it, she laughed softly and said, "He's misunderstood. People just don't get him. He's not dangerous. He just needs trust." But the comments section told another story. People begged her to stop. "Please, don't swim with him anymore. Let him go. You're risking your life." "It's a ticking time bomb." Julia never replied. The warnings had been clear, repeated, and in just a few weeks, they would prove tragically justified. August 18th, 2023. It was a blisteringly hot afternoon. In Clearwater Springs, the air was thick with humidity, sticky, heavy, unmoving. Julia Banks stepped into her backyard, holding a pool skimmer in one hand and a bucket in the other. The water was cloudy, tinted green from algae. Like she had done dozens of times before, she planned to clean it. Reef was there, floating in the shallow end. His massive form moved slowly beneath the surface. Normally, Reef remained calm during pool maintenance, sometimes curious, sometimes entirely indifferent. But today, there was something different. His eyes were half closed, but his body, his muscles, were tense, still, coiled. Julia noticed none of it, or chose not to. She eased into the pool, confident, unafraid, oblivious to the danger waiting just beneath the surface. She had done this 100 times before, but this time was different. Unbeknownst to Julia, Reef was agitated. He had been fed less than an hour earlier, a large meal that left him full, restless, and instinctively alert. Deep within him, primal behaviors stirred beneath the surface of calm. As Julia dipped the skimmer into the pool, Reef shifted. In an instant, his massive tail swept beneath her legs, throwing her off balance. Before she could react, his jaws clamped around her right leg. The force was unimaginable. And then came the death roll, a violent spinning maneuver, nature's method of tearing prey apart. Julia's scream tore through the still air, raw and desperate. She thrashed, tried to break free, but Reef's grip was unrelenting. Panic shattered the quiet afternoon. Neighbors, startled by the commotion, ran to their windows, to their fences, and dialed 911. To Julia, it had seemed like just another afternoon, another simple pool cleaning, another quiet moment spent with the animal she had raised from a baby. But Reef had other plans. 15 p.m. Clara Monroe, Julia's next-door neighbor, was tending her garden when the screams began. At first, it was just a strange thrashing sound, then a cry so sharp and filled with terror that it made her blood run cold. She dropped her trowel and ran toward the fence. What she saw froze her in place. In the pool next door, Reef, the massive alligator she had only ever seen sunbathing or drifting silently, was violently thrashing, and Julia was trapped in his jaws. He had her by the leg. Her limbs flailed as he dragged her deeper, the pool frothing with movement. Then he rolled again, and again. Each spin yanked Julia beneath the surface, water churning red as blood streaked. "The blue! Help! Please!" Julia cried out, her voice breaking. But the screams were swallowed by chaos, the sound of water, of violence, of nature reclaiming control. Clara's hands shook as she grabbed her phone. "Ju, what's your emergency?" "There's blood in the pool. She's not moving," Clara gasped. "Please hurry. Someone's being attacked by an alligator." Reef dragged Julia toward the deep end, jaws locked tight. Her struggling slowed, the fight draining from her body. Neighbors stood in shock, some calling out, others paralyzed behind windows and fences. Then came the sound of sirens. Within 8 minutes of Clara's call, emergency vehicles screeched onto the quiet street. Paramedics rushed through the backyard gate, followed by officers from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The scene was chaos. Neighbors, frozen in horror. The pool, once clear, now clouded with blood and silt. And Reef, still in the water, still guarding Julia's body. Wildlife officers moved quickly. They carried long poles designed for animal control, their movements sharp and deliberate. Reef thrashed again, his massive tail slamming against the pool's edge as officers tried to force him back. In the center of it all, Julia lay motionless, her body drifting, pale, silent, beneath the surface she once called safe. It was a tense, dangerous dance. One misstep could have cost another life. Paramedics approached the pool cautiously as wildlife officers distracted Reef with long poles and Measured movements. With the gator momentarily pushed back, responders entered the water and pulled Julia Banks to safety. Her body was limp, pale, covered in lacerations and deep bruises. Her right leg bore the unmistakable damage of an alligator bite. Massive puncture, wounds, crushed muscle, and ripped flesh. But it wasn't just the trauma. Julia had been underwater too long. Her lungs were waterlogged, her breathing shallow and labored. Despite the swift response and frantic medical efforts, Julia never regained consciousness. She was rushed by ambulance to Clearwater General Hospital, where trauma surgeons worked through the afternoon and into the evening to save her life. But the injuries were too severe. In a sterile room filled with beeping machines and whispered prayers, Julia Banks was pronounced dead just before midnight. The news sent shockwaves through Clearwater Springs. A beloved member of the community, known for her compassion and passion for rescuing wildlife, was gone, and the crisis wasn't over. Following her death, state wildlife officers captured Reef using tranquilizer darts. The alligator, once a cherished companion, was now considered a lethal threat. Per Florida Wildlife Protocol, captive alligators involved in human fatalities cannot be relocated or rehomed. The decision was swift. Reef was euthanized within hours. The backyard that once symbolized a unique, if controversial, bond between woman and beast now stood empty. Just a pool, a fence, and silence. The story of Julia Banks spread far beyond her neighborhood. Local news gave way to state headlines, which soon turned into national coverage. The public response was swift and divided. Some mourned her death, others pointed to the risks she had ignored. But in Clearwater Springs, the grief was personal. Candlelight vigils sprang up around town. Dozens gathered in the local park, holding photos of Julia smiling beside Reef when he was still just a hatchling. There were tears, embraces, and quiet moments of reflection as friends and neighbors remembered the woman who saw beauty in creatures. Others feared. She loved him, yes, said Sarah Middleton, a longtime colleague at the Regional Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. But somewhere along the way, she forgot what he really was, a wild animal. No matter how close you think you are, the instincts don't just disappear. That warning echoed through the community. Soon, the conversation turned national. Animal. Rights advocates and wildlife experts reignited calls for stricter exotic pet laws in Florida. How many times do we have to see tragedy before we act? One panelist demanded on a morning news show. Dr. Marcus Lanning, a respected herpetologist, explained bluntly, "Domestication is a myth. You can't train nature out of an alligator's DNA. These animals are designed for survival, and when they reach adulthood, they revert to their natural behaviors, often with deadly consequences." The death of Julia Banks forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths about human-wildlife relationships. It wasn't just about one woman and her pet. It was about the line between love and illusion, between care and control. Animal behaviorist Dr. Leah Torres, who spent more than 2 decades studying reptilian behavior, later offered insight into what likely happened during those final devastating moments. Alligators are territorial by nature, she explained. When Reef reached his full size, over 7 feet long and hundreds of pounds, his instinct to defend his space intensified. Julia, no matter how familiar she seemed to him, was no longer just a caretaker. She was competition. Or worse, a threat. Had become, in Reef's eyes, a perceived threat in his territory. Dr. Torres highlights the timing of the attack as crucial. Alligators, she explains, exhibit specific behaviors related to feeding, often including heightened aggression shortly after eating or when anticipating food. Julia entered the pool not long after Reef had been fed. Torres said, "That's a dangerous window. The animal's hunger may be satisfied, but its instincts are still engaged. Its territory, its mood, its space, all become unpredictable." She stresses that warning signs like hissing, tail slapping, or sudden lunging are subtle cues, easy for the average person to misread or ignore, especially when emotional bonds cloud judgment. Humans anthropomorphize these animals, Torres continues. We see calmness and think it means affection. We confuse tolerance with trust. But predators, no matter how familiar, are still driven by instinct. The wild doesn't get tamed by love. It's a hard truth, and it cost Julia her life. Dr. Torres closes with a somber warning. This tragedy reminds us why wildlife must be respected for what it truly is: powerful, unpredictable, and wild. Emotional attachment doesn't rewrite biology. No matter how close you think you are, you cannot fully control or predict a predator's actions. Julia Banks devoted her life to rescuing and caring for animals, but in trying to tame nature, she lost her life to it. Her memorial, ringed by flickering candles and photos of a smiling woman beside a once small alligator, now stands as a solemn reminder. A reminder of the fragile, often invisible line between human and wild. If Julia's story moved you, please share this video. Help raise awareness about the dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories from the wild. Don't miss our next video, where we explore the risks behind owning dangerous predators and what it truly takes to coexist with nature. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and respect the wild.